Escaping isn't the hard part, understanding what comes after is. Because once you step outside the system, everything becomes your responsibility, your direction, your discipline, your meaning. And suddenly, the structure you once wanted to escape doesn't look like control anymore. It looks like relief, because inside it, you didn't have to decide everything. But out here, there are no defaults, no automatic paths, only choices. And most people don't stay trapped because they can't leave. They stay because deep down, they know what freedom will demand from them. A lie many people carry without realizing it, the belief that one day they will wake up, see through everything, break free from the system, and finally feel free. But what if the moment you escape is not the moment your life becomes easier, but the moment it becomes heavier? Because deep down, there is a fear most people never articulate. What if I'm not trapped? What if I'm avoiding the responsibility of being free? It is comforting to believe that something external is holding you back, a system, a structure, a matrix, because if the cage is outside of you, then your life is not entirely your fault. But if the cage begins to dissolve, if you start seeing through the illusions, the expectations, the patterns, the roles you were given, then something unsettling happens. You are no longer controlled, and yet you are not relieved. You are exposed. Modern culture romanticizes the idea of escaping, breaking free from society, rejecting norms, refusing the script. It is presented as rebellion, as awakening, as liberation. But what is rarely discussed is what comes after. Because the moment you step outside of what is expected, you also step outside of what is structured. And structure, even when limiting, provides something deeply comforting: direction. The system tells you what matters, what success looks like, what to aim for next. But when you reject it, you are left with something far more difficult than control. You are left with choice. And choice, when fully realized, is not light, it is weight. The psychologist Carl Jung understood this paradox deeply. He believed that most people do not truly want freedom, they want relief from inner conflict. But true freedom does not remove conflict, it reveals it. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." But awakening is not a comfortable process, because when you begin to look inward, you no longer have external structures to blame. You begin to see your patterns, your fears, your unconscious decisions, and perhaps most unsettling of all, you begin to realize that much of your life was not imposed on you, it was unconsciously chosen. This is where the illusion of escape begins to collapse, because escaping the system does not free you from yourself, it introduces you to yourself. And that introduction is not always pleasant. There are stages to this realization, not as a linear path, but as a deepening awareness. The first shift is the illusion of awakening. At this stage, you begin to see through things. You notice how society operates on repetition, how people follow scripts they never question, how success often feels performative. There is a sense of clarity here, even superiority. You feel as though you have stepped outside of something others are still trapped in. There is a scene. A person sits alone at night, scrolling less, observing more. They watch the patterns, the trends, the opinions, the endless noise, and for the first time, they feel detached from it. Not angry, not reactive, just separate. This feels like freedom. But it is only the beginning, because awareness without responsibility is still a form of escape. The second shift is the loss of structure. Once you stop believing in the system, you also lose the guidance it provided. You no longer feel driven by traditional goals. The milestones that once motivated you begin to feel arbitrary, and this creates a quiet disorientation. Because if success is no longer clearly defined, then what are you moving toward? This is where many people turn back. They return to the familiar structures, not because they believe in them, but because they fear the absence of direction. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this moment when he said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster, and if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." When you dismantle external meaning, you are left staring into that abyss, and the question becomes unavoidable. If nothing is inherently meaningful, what will I choose to give meaning to? The third shift is the confrontation with responsibility. This is the point where the idea of freedom becomes real and heavy, because now your life is no longer defined by external expectations, which means you are responsible for your direction, your values, your decisions. There is no script left to follow, no clear path to justify your choices, only you. There is another scene. A man sits in his car after a long day, engine off, silence surrounding him. For years, his life followed a structure: education, career, progress. But now, something has shifted. He no longer believes that path defines him, and yet he has no replacement. He sits there, not in panic, but in a quiet realization: no one is coming to tell me what to do next. This is not freedom as it is usually imagined. This is responsibility in its purest form. Viktor Frankl once said, "Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. To be free is not simply to remove constraints, it is to carry the burden of meaning, to decide consciously what your life will stand for. And this decision cannot be outsourced." The fourth shift is the creation of self. This is where true transformation begins, not in escaping the system, but in building something in its absence. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming an integrated, whole person. But individuation is not about comfort. It is about truth. It requires you to confront parts of yourself you may have ignored, your contradictions, your fears, your potential. And slowly, you begin to construct a life that is not given, but chosen, not perfect, not certain, but real. This process is not dramatic, it is quiet. There are no clear milestones, no external validation, just a gradual sense of alignment. You begin to act not because you should, but because it feels consistent with who you are becoming. And this is where a different kind of freedom emerges. Not the absence of responsibility, but the acceptance of it. There is a deeper layer to this realization, one that most people only encounter later in life, when time becomes more visible, when the future feels less infinite. There is a final scene. Older man sits by a window, watching the light shift slowly across the room. His life has been lived, choices made, paths taken, opportunities missed. There is no system left to blame, no expectations left to fulfill, only reflection, and in that reflection one truth becomes clear. The moments that mattered most were not the ones dictated by structure, but the ones chosen consciously, the ones where he acted not out of habit but out of awareness, and perhaps more importantly, the moments where he took responsibility for who he was becoming. At the edge of life, freedom is not measured by how much you escaped, but by how much you owned your decisions, your direction, your meaning. Because escaping the matrix does not free you from life, it returns life to you, unfiltered, undefined, and entirely yours. This is the part that is rarely spoken about, because it is easier to talk about breaking free than it is to talk about what comes after. It is easier to blame the system than to take responsibility for your existence. But the moment you see through everything, you cannot unsee it. And from that point forward, your life is no longer something that happens to you. It is something you participate in, fully, consciously, and sometimes uncomfortably. So if you feel that shift, that subtle detachment from what once felt certain, if the goals you are given no longer carry the same weight, if you feel both clearer and more uncertain at the same time, do not rush to escape again. Do not search for another system to replace the old one. You may not be lost. You may be standing at the point where freedom begins to reveal its true nature, not as ease, not as relief, but as responsibility. And perhaps that is what makes it meaningful. If this reflection stayed with you, if it made something inside you pause, even briefly, consider staying connected, not for answers, but for the kind of questions that slowly changes how you see your own life.